The heart. This photo accurately depicts the heart. These are the different structures that make up the anatomy of the heart. Cardiac cycle. The heart is described as myogenic. This means that it can contract and relax without receiving signals from nerves. The cardiac cycle has two phases: systole, the contracting phase, and diastole, the relaxing phase. The image here shows how the cardiac cycle operates within the heart muscle. The ventricles and atria relax. Blood starts to fill the atria, increasing the pressure in the atria. The ventricles are relaxing, which decreases their pressure below that of the atria to the atrioventricular valves open. This allows blood to flow passively into the ventricles. The ventricles and atria relax. Blood starts to fill the atria, increasing the pressure in the atria. The ventricles are relaxing, which decreases their pressure below that of the atria, so the atrioventricular valves open. This allows blood to flow passively into the ventricles. The atria contract, decreasing their volume, and increasing the pressure. This pushes about 10% of the last filling volume of the heart from the atria into the ventricles, and this increases the pressure in the ventricles. The atria relax, the ventricles contract, decreasing the volume and increasing the pressure. The pressure is higher in the ventricles than the atria, forcing the atrioventricular valves shut to prevent backflow. The pressure is higher in the ventricles than in the major arteries, which forces the semilunar valves to open, allowing for blood flow. Valves open one way depending on the relative pressure of the chambers. Atrioventricular valves link the atria to the ventricles and stop blood flowing back into the atria when the ventricles contract. Semilunar valves link the ventricles to the pulmonary artery and the aorta and stop blood flowing back into the heart after the ventricles have contracted. The cords attach the valves to the ventricles to stop them from being forced up into the atria when the ventricles contract. The process of a heartbeat. The SA node, the sinoatrial node, is in the right atrium, sets the rhythm of the heartbeat by sending out regular waves of electrical activity, excitation, wavefronts to the atrial walls. This causes the left and right atria to contract simultaneously. A band of non-conducting collagen tissue prevents the wave of electrical activity from being passed directly between the atria and the ventricles. Instead, the waves of electrical activity are sent from the sinoatrial to the atrioventricular node, the AV node. The AV node passes the waves of electrical activity on to the bundle of His with a slight delay. This is to make sure the atria are emptied before the ventricles contract, and the ventricles contract in a synchronous, coordinated manner as a whole chamber. The bundle of His conducts the waves of electrical activity between the ventricles down to the apex of the heart. The bundle splits into thinner muscle fibers up the ventricle walls called the Purkinje tissue. The Purkinje tissue carries the waves of electrical activity into the muscular walls of the left and right ventricles, causing them to contract simultaneously and from the bottom upwards. Cardiovascular disease. Most cardiovascular disease starts with atheroma formation. Atheroma formation. If damage occurs to the endothelium, white blood cells and lipids from the blood clump together under the lining, forming fatty streaks. Eventually, this builds up and hardens to form a fibrous plaque called an atheroma or atheromatous plaque. Coronary artery disease. It occurs when the coronary arteries have lots of atheromas which restrict the blood flow to the heart muscle. This can cause myocardial infarction. Myocardial infarction. When a coronary artery gets occluded or blocked, an area of heart muscle gets cut off from its blood supply and therefore oxygen supply. This causes a heart attack or myocardial infarction. Aneurysm. Atheroma plaques damage and weaken the arteries as well as narrow them. This increases blood pressure. When the high blood pressure blood flows through the damaged arteries, it may push the inner layer through the elastic outer layer to form balloon-like swellings. The balloon-like swellings are called aneurysms. Aneurysms may burst and cause internal bleeding, which could be fatal. New paragraph. Thrombosis. An atheroma plaque can rupture on the inner lining of it, the endothelium or the endothelial lining, damaging the inner aspect of the artery wall and leaving a rough surface. Platelets and fibrin, a protein, accumulate at the site and form a blood clot. So basically, platelets initially aggregate with release of ADP, thromboxane, and prostaglandins or prostacyclin. They result in forming an initial clot, a platelet-based clot, and that is further on attracting fibrin, breaks down fibrinogen into fibrin, which create polymer products, and that results in a fibrin clot. Platelets and fibrin, which is a protein, a coagulation protein, accumulate at the site of the endothelial rupture or atheroma plaque rupture or endothelial injury and form a blood clot. This can block the artery or become dislodged and block a blood vessel elsewhere in the body, or distal down an artery path. Cardiovascular disease risk factors. These are high blood cholesterol, poor diet, secondary to poor diet. Cholesterol is one of the main constituents of the fatty deposits that form atheromas, which increase blood pressure and blood clot formation. Now you may be wondering why higher blood pressures cause increased atheroma formation, atheromatous or atherosclerotic plaques. The reason being that higher blood pressures generate more turbulence flow inside the vessels, and the more turbulent the flow inside vessels, especially at junctions or vessel bifurcations, the more the chances of endothelial injury to endothelium. The next high risk factor of cerebrovascular or cardiovascular disease is smoking cigarettes. Nicotine in the smoke increases blood pressure as well. Smoking reduces the amount of antioxidants in the blood. Third, high blood pressure. High blood pressure increases the risk of damage to the artery walls. Atheromas can also cause blood clots, leading to heart attacks, etc. Factors affecting heart rate and high blood pressure. Baroreceptors in the aorta and carotid arteries detect high blood pressure impulses. And impulses are sent to the medulla oblongata, which contains the cardiovascular respiratory regulatory centers, the regulatory centers of all our vital functions. It's the most primitive part of the brain, so-called paleocortex. Impulses are thus sent to the medulla, which further sends down impulses along the parasympathetic neurons. These secrete acetylcholine, which binds the receptors on the sinoatrial node. This causes the heart rate to slow down and blood pressure to return to its normal. Low blood pressure. Baroreceptors in the aorta and carotid arteries detect low blood pressure. Impulses are sent to the medulla, which sends impulses along sympathetic neurons. These secrete noradrenaline, which binds the receptors on the sinoatrial node, and this causes the heart rate to speed up and the blood pressure to rise or return to normal. High blood oxygen or low blood carbon dioxide or high pH, blood pH detected by chemoreceptors in the aorta and carotid arteries, and in particular the medulla oblongata, results in impulses being sent to the medulla, which sends back impulses along parasympathetic neurons. These secrete acetylcholine, which binds the receptors in the sinoatrial node. This causes the heart rate to slow down and the blood levels or the blood pressure levels to return to normal. Low blood oxygen or high blood carbon dioxide or low pH, detected by chemoreceptors in the aorta and carotid arteries and medulla oblongata. Impulses are sent to the medulla, which sends impulses along sympathetic neurons. These secrete noradrenaline, which binds to receptors on the sinoatrial node. This causes the heart rate to speed up and the blood pressure levels to return to normal. Thank you for your patience.